one of the biggest concerns I have with Christianity is the problem of divine hiddenness, and just what appears to me to be the fact that I don't have any sufficient information that would compel me to believe in God or to accept Christianity. And as a result of that, a second point I would make is that I also don't think that all of my beliefs are under my voluntary control, either as a direct result of like I can just will myself to believe or disbelieve things, or as a result of the degree to which I can motivate, like I could work up the motivation to pursue certain sorts of inquiry or to find myself convinced by that inquiry. So I could go read a bunch of books, or I could go reread the Bible 100 times. Even if I chose to do that, first of all, I don't think I could choose to do that. I think I wouldn't be able to do that. And then second, even if I did, I'm not sure that I couldn't compel myself to be persuaded by it. So one of my concerns with the Christian worldview is that it looks like people are held morally accountable for beliefs that they can't choose to have or not have. They don't have choices in the matter. What do you think of that sort of concern?
Yeah, well, okay, I guess actually, this is bringing up a topic that's close to my heart because, you know, there's the view of they call it, well, it's the exclusivist view in Christianity, where only those who believe and confess Jesus as Lord can be saved. Okay. And that's a very popular view among Christians, is that, you know, the only way to be saved is to actually believe in Jesus. And if you don't believe in Jesus, then, you know, there's no hope for you. Now, I think that view is wrong. Okay. So I think that, if you believe in Jesus, then you have assurance of salvation, meaning that's a surefire way to know that you're saved, is to trust in Jesus, believe in him, and you have a promise of eternal life. But I do believe that Jesus's salvation, like God's plan of salvation, is big enough to save everyone. And so there are people who may not believe. Maybe it's because they never heard the gospel. Maybe it's because, you know, they heard and they weren't convinced. Maybe it's, you know, whatever. There could be a myriad of reasons why, you know, maybe they were harmed in the church when they were little and then they, you know, had a distaste for Jesus. So what I'm saying is that I believe that Jesus is able to save people who may not have, you know, heard the gospel and trusted in him in the moment.
It does seem kind of strange, though. Like, why would God have created me? Like, assuming God existed, why create me and then make me incapable of believing in God given the conditions that God himself set up? That seems weird. Doesn't God want me to believe in him and have a relationship with him? Why would he make me incapable of doing so?
Yeah, well, I think that does assume a lot more action on God's part, so I think there's more than one influence going on in the world. I mean, you know, we have, you know, okay, you've got your genetics, you've got your culture in which you're raised in, you've got, there's spiritual forces, spiritual beings in the world that don't want you to believe in God, that are actively coming against your belief in God or your potential for faith. You have your own fleshly desires that may keep you from God. So, that may keep you from actually turning to God. So there's like a whole bunch of things that can be influencing, and like God is not in control of all those things. He's actually limited his power in this world. And so he's given power to beings like you and me. And because of that, there's a lot of things that are factoring into to whether or not you believe. And I think it has, I don't hold God responsible for that.
why would God do that? It just seems, to me, I'm not even trying to disprove God or anything. It just seems strange. Just create a world, make some people able to believe, some people not, give some people direct revelatory experiences, some people not, have some people witness miracles, some people never see any, no matter how hard they look for them, have some people be psychologically constituted in ways that they're moved by the Bible and other people are just not. And sure, okay, so I'm buffeted by all the forces of culture and experience and you know, the forces of light and darkness operating behind the scenes, the angels and the demons all over the place. Even assuming all of that is true, it could have been set up differently. You know, God could show up right, like Jesus could just show up right here and be like, hey, I am real. Are you going to believe? Like, think about that. Because like, we're like, lots of people would see that. Boom, you got a bunch of believers. Why not? Why not do that? And, you know, I've heard answers to why God wouldn't do that, where like to do something that would compel belief. And that would have an immediate transformative change in my life. I'm assuming you would think it would be good if, you know, I was going for a walk one day and God started talking to me and was like, yo, I'm real, you know, hopefully it'd be cooler than that. But, you know, angels show up with some trumpets and they're like, God exists, you were dumb and wrong, you know, like that would be fun. I would think God was funny and I would be a believer. And presumably like you would think that'd be wonderful if I was like, Rebecca, I saw angels and now I'm a believer. Like, let's go, you know, go Jesus. Like I'm on team Jesus now. Presumably that you would think that would be great. Why doesn't God, because God could do that right now. Why doesn't God do that? Why not?
Yeah, well, okay, that's a good question. And I will say in like supporting what you're saying, I have heard a lot of testimonies of people for whom that did happen, that Jesus appeared to them and it was life-changing for them. I've never heard someone say, Jesus appeared to me, but I said, nah, you know, like, so I think you're right that, you know, those who have that experience, they are changed. And so, okay, so why isn't God doing that for everyone? Well, I don't know. But I do believe that each of us are on a journey and there's beauty in the journey. And so like we will all end up where we wanted to be. And so if your desire is, if there's a God and he's good and he's beautiful and he's loving and you want to be part of his kingdom, and you know, I believe that that's where you will end up. And so, and, you know, I think that there are some people who won't. And, you know, because even, you know, Satan and some of the angels turned against God, even though they were in God's presence. So there are some people and some beings who don't want God as king. And so they won't be part of God's kingdom.
So I guess to go back to what we were getting earlier, I don't know if I got a straight answer in this. Maybe you're not able to give one. Am I doing something morally wrong if I don't believe in God? Like, if you fail to believe in God, you are doing something morally wrong.
Well, Lance, you know, this is my opinion and people don't like it and they often get mad when I say it. But I think God has revealed enough of himself that everyone can know him, even if he doesn't appear to them. You know, so I think he is revealed in nature. He's revealed in who you are. He's revealed in many ways in the beauty in this earth. And so to me, I don't see that, you know, I do want to leave it open for like, okay, people who have had a traumatic experience, something like that. And maybe you have, I don't know. So I don't know. I can't say with definite for everyone's experience, but I do think God has revealed himself to you. Jesus has never appeared to me, but I have no problem believing in Jesus. So why do I have no problem believing in Jesus? He didn't ever appear to me.
Right. So I don't know the answers, but what if I'm just bad at interpreting evidence? Like, am I morally responsible for that? So you give me all this good evidence of God, and then I'm like, I don't really get it. Or I don't know. I read a bunch of science books or atheist books that I'm like, I'm not going to take that seriously. And, now I'm not good at reasoning. I'd like to believe it if it's true, but I can't because of my own, I don't know, emotional blocks or whatever it is. Is that like, is it morally wrong for me to not believe it? It just seems weird to hold people morally accountable for their beliefs, especially if those beliefs are not voluntary. So the question to me, can I voluntarily choose to believe in God? Yes or no? I think a lot of Christians would say yes. And I think the answer is no, I can't. I don't think I could choose to believe in God. And then the question is, a couple questions. One would be, if I can't choose to believe in God, does it make sense to hold me morally responsible for not believing in God? And then the second is, what if I could choose and I choose not to? Am I still morally responsible? And if so, why? Like, what if I have good reasons to choose not to believe in God? And so there's sort of layers of issues that I have with the moralization of whether or not people believe in God.
Yeah. Well, I think that the way that Jesus describes Judgment Day entails much more than belief, right? So I think that, Lance, if you really can't believe in God, something in your psychology does not allow you to believe in God, then your actions on this earth will show which kingdom you actually wanted to belong to. So that when you do see Jesus on Judgment Day, and if you want to be part of his kingdom, then you will have been doing actions on this earth that show that you demonstrate that you wanted to be part of his kingdom. And I'm not just pulling this out of anywhere. I'm getting this from Matthew chapter 25. Jesus talks about the way he's going to judge the nations. And he says he's going to gather them together like a shepherd gathering and separating the sheep from the goats. And why were the sheep accepted? It doesn't say because you believed in me. Actually, the sheep are surprised in that scenario. The sheep are surprised when Jesus welcomes them. Okay, so Jesus said, come. He didn't say, come, you who believed. He said, come, you who are blessed by my Father and inherit the kingdom prepared for you. Because when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was a stranger, you invited me in. And it goes on. And then they say, Lord, when did we do that for you? And Jesus says, whenever you did this for the least of these, you did it for me. Okay, so here we're getting a picture. And then what happens to the goats? Jesus doesn't say to the goats, oh, you didn't believe, so no goodies for you. You're not getting in the kingdom. No, he didn't. It had nothing to do with their belief. He said, depart from me because you did not feed me when I was hungry. You did not clothe me when I was naked. You did not do these things for me. And they say, Lord, when didn't we do that for you? And he said, whatever you did not do for the least of these, you also did not do for me. So there's much more to Judgment Day. I don't think you're going to be judged just based on whether or not you believed, but also on what did your life look like? And, so you're going to be judged based on what you've done. And so I think that opens up the potential. I'm not saying that those people who did good things, that's they still needed Jesus to die on the cross for sins so that they could be healed of their sin and corruption. Because even if you're doing good deeds, you've still got the corruption in you that needs to be resolved and taken care of by Jesus. But it's just that by your actions, Jesus isn't stupid. You know what I mean? He's not he's not stupid. He knows what's going on in people's hearts and lives, right? So does that make sense?
It does. It raises question. Well, I mean, one would be how well supported your perspective is scripturally. So, it could just be what if you were convinced of scriptural readings that entail that you're just wrong about this and you have to believe? And it seems would that raise questions to you about the morality of your belief system?
Well, this is something that absolutely. Because I don't think Like, and this is why I said this topic is really, I think it's important. It's extremely important. And I think a lot of Christians are getting this wrong. Okay. And so I am passionate about sharing this because a lot of Christians are not, I think they're ignoring half of the Bible to support. Now, there are a few verses that say, you know, if you don't believe, you're condemned and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Okay. There are a few verses like that. But then you have many other passages of Scripture, Old and New Testament, that say the righteous are going to have eternal life. That and even that Jesus came to bring good news to the poor. Okay, that God has promised to take care of the poor. So most of the poor who have ever lived on this earth never heard the gospel. So is God really serious about those promises to the poor? Jesus said, you know, blessed are you who are poor. So how are the poor blessed if, like, Jesus is going to judge them just based on what they believed or didn't believe about him? If they never heard the gospel, like that is the situation for most of the poor who have ever lived. So what I'm saying is we can't ignore like so many passages of Scripture that promise that God is righteous and good and just, that he cares about the poor, that Jesus came to bring good news to the poor. If you have to believe in Jesus and like confess Jesus's name in this life to be saved, then that means Jesus is actually bad news for the poor. Okay, so I don't believe Jesus is bad news for the poor. I believe he's good news for the poor and for the rest of the world. So, you know, I think this issue is important because it does, you know, it changes, it changes whether or not Jesus is good news for the world. Like, is Jesus good news for the world or is Jesus bad news for the world? Because if Jesus is like, if this exclusive view is true that one must know and confess Jesus in this life, then that's actually bad news for the world because that means it got harder after he came to get saved. Does that make sense?
I mean, something makes sense. Doesn't mean I agree with it, but sure, I made sense of it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to take this back to the free will stuff because I feel like, and this is totally due to me pushing the conversation in this direction, but one of the things I'm curious about is why you, and I don't know, sorry, another thing to say. I'm not sure we're going to get clear on a definition of free will. My impression is that you're probably not too keen on the compatibilist conceptions of free will and that you endorse some other one. I don't know that we really want to get into like trying to figure out a definition and do like this conceptual analysis. I don't know if that would be fun or interesting, but one of the things I am curious about, and if you want to do that, I'll do that, but is why you believe in free will. Is it so like at least a couple possibilities would be like your phenomenology, because it seems like you reported that like it seems to you like experientially like you have free will, but then there might also be a scriptural basis for it. But whatever, there's a couple possibilities, but why do you believe in free will?
Yeah, well, because, first of all, I would say a lot of it is experience-based, right? Like I'm experiencing life as if I have free will. I feel that right now there are options before me in this 1 minute. There are options before me that I could choose from, and I don't feel that those are determined. But anyway, so yes, experience is a big part of it. But I do think that like it makes sense in my understanding of reality and the way that God interacts with people. You know, a lot of times God in the Bible is telling people like, if you do this, then, you know, this will happen. I'll bless you. But if you do this, then I'm not going to bless you. So, or, you know, this bad thing will happen. So if there's no real option about what's going to happen, then God is just playing a big game, right? Like he already knows and he's already determined it, or whatever factors have determined it. So then like everything he's saying is just a big game, right? Like he doesn't really mean it. That means like God is like being insincere throughout the scripture. You know what I'm saying? So like if he's presenting options to people and he's kind of telling them what will happen if it goes either way, then there must be some opportunity for it to go either way. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah, I gotcha. So that first one that you say, it feels like you have free will.
Yes.
What is the experience like?
Now, see, Lance, this is where I can get into it with you, because you've shared before that you feel the opposite, and I just think, how is that possible that one feels that their actions are determined? Because I mean, what is that experience like? I feel like it's kind of silly to describe it, because I think most people have that experience, right?
Well, what would it feel like if your decisions were determined?
I don't know.
So how do you know that that's not what it's like right now?
You're right. It's a good point. I don't know.
So you don't know what it would be like if it wasn't the way that you think it is. So how do you know it is the way you think it is and not the way you don't think it is?
It's a good point. I just have to leave it at that point, because I don't know.
So that would be one of my concerns, which is that you might think that if our actions are determined, that it would feel, or at least it could feel like they're determined. And one of the ways you might describe that is like, oh, you're just watching yourself do things. Like, oh, I'm not making choices. My arm is just doing a thing. That's one way it could feel if your actions were determined. But the thing is, if our actions are determined, in addition to that, it's not just like my arm is just doing a thing on its own. It's that I could think, hey, I'd like to pick up this can, and I'd like to have a drink. All of those experiences that you have, if determinism is true, could themselves be determined. And so all of the experiences that you're having, even if determinism is true, the experience of feeling like you're making decisions and deliberating through, do I want to have this thing on the menu or that thing on the menu? Do I want to go to the store tomorrow or not go to the store? All those psychological states, if they are the product of deterministic psychological processes, would themselves feel exactly the way that they currently feel to you. And so it seems to me that if determinism is true, your experience, there's like not a distinguishable difference in what your experiences would be like. So that's one consideration. The other, and it's not that I feel like my decisions are determined, but I do sometimes notice portions or elements of my experiences that do seem to be automated. And like you're like, if you've ever been driving and talking to somebody, you could signal in your car and turn, and I'm not even deliberating or thinking through any of that. It's been pushed into my unconscious. And so a lot of our actions are already happening in some cases outside of conscious awareness. A lot of our psychological processes, we're not even attending to them when we're doing things. I mean, I'm sure you've been talking on the phone and walking at the same time, and you're like only attending to the conversation and don't even think. Like, I could get through folding a whole stack of laundry and not even remember that I did it 5 minutes later, because I wasn't even consciously attending to that fact. Did I choose to do that? I yes, but it didn't feel like I was acting out of free will. There was some part of my brain that's like, fold laundry while I'm talking on the phone. And so I think if we actually reflect on our phenomenology, like our subjective experience of what our decision-making is like, we'll notice a sort of gradient, or a sort of a spectrum between actions that we're like more attentive to, and we have greater sort of self-awareness or mindfulness of those actions, and others where we're less mindful of them. And some of them seem like they're more a product of free will, and some of them seem like they're less a product of free will, to the extent that that's how we want to describe those experiences. So I think that's like a second point on this. And then the third point is, if you really are like mindful about your experiences, you might find that like a lot of the decisions you end up making might superficially seem like they're voluntary or you're choosing them. But if you really reflect, in some cases, you might find that those decisions actually kind of just seem to happen, and then you're noticing them. And so a lot of my when I've like really reflected on my experiences, a lot of them kind of seem that way. And so I don't have this straightforward experience that I am like the buck stops with me in terms of decision making, but rather that in many cases, my choices and my actions sort of bubble up out of the unconscious abyss of my mind and direct my actions in ways that I couldn't have anticipated. And in a certain sense, I am simply an observer too. That is what my experience is like. And I think, I also don't think that I'm like super psychologically idiosyncratic. I suspect I just reflected on it and I've noticed this about my experiences. I suspect other people would if they reflect too. Maybe I'm wrong though. Could be people are very different from one another. I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think you're making some good points there. And so I can see what you mean about some processes feeling automated and, you know, and maybe it's more like that than I'm giving credit for in other areas. Now, do you want to, we've been going for an hour. Do you want to move over to your channel or do you want to go into the talk about the, like,
I could talk about some of the research if you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah.
Sure. Is this something we've talked about before?
We've talked about it a little bit before, yeah. But, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not super eager to hop over to my channel. I also am curious, should we address some of the, it looks like there's a lot of stuff going on in the chat.
Sure, we can.
I also don't know if anybody wants to talk or what they want to talk about. So we might want to figure both of those things out.
Okay, cool.
But it's totally up to you. It's your channel. You tell me what you want to do.
No, I want this talk to go the way you want. But so Peter says, if we don't choose according to an antecedent factor like our nature and circumstances, is this free will being claimed completely arbitrary? Well, I guess this is a question for me. I don't know. Well, Lance, do you want to respond to this?
Yeah, I don't know what's meant by completely arbitrary. I mean, I kind of get the sense that if we have, it sounds like they're asking a question like if there's a compatibilist conception of free will, is this kind of free will like arbitrary? Like, what's the point? What is it getting us? I mean, I'm not really sensitive to these kinds of considerations myself because I just don't think whether we have free will or not is the right way to frame these sorts of actions. What I would say is, personally, I suspect that our actions are determined by antecedent causes. Maybe they're not. I think if they're not, that the only alternative that seems plausible to me is that there would be an element of randomness or indeterminacy to our actions. I don't know what I can't really make sense of libertarian conceptions of free will that deny both of those and think that we're like the ultimate source of our act. I don't know what they mean by that. And what little I've seen of those sorts of accounts end up getting into obscure metaphysics and terminology that I just don't understand. It doesn't mean they're wrong, but I don't even know what those positions amount to. And it often seems that if you reject those accounts, that you're left with, like one of the charges people might make of the compatibilist accounts is that they're giving you a kind of like a pseudo free will. It's like they're calling this something free will, but it's not really free will because they're conceding determinism could be true and you would still have this kind of free will. And the attitude some people have is if determinism is true, you couldn't possibly have any kind of practically meaningful kind of free will. But a lot of that ends up being predicated on normative considerations, in some cases moral considerations, and in many cases considerations of value and meaning. And I have very different views on value, meaning, and morality than most people. And so a lot of these issues just don't really affect my position on these issues. So for instance, one of the central disputes that people might have is they might say, if we don't have, like, never mind the determinism question, if we don't have any kind of free will, then we're not morally responsible. And therefore, you're not justified in punishing people or blaming people. And I reject that entire framework. I don't really believe in that kind of moral responsibility. And I don't really believe in punishing or blaming people in this desert. I don't think you should punish people because they deserve to be punished. I reject that entire framework. Because I'm a moral anti-realist, my normative standards are going to come down to, on my position at least, my desires and values for what kind of world I want to live in. And people might see that as potentially horrifying and terrible, but at least one advantage of this view is that if it turns out we don't have free will, I don't think that we have to, let murderers run in the street killing people. I would just say, I don't want them to, and that's good enough for me as a reason. So my position kind of just, it's like two ships passing. It just sails on by these concerns, and I'm just like, I don't care about any of these concerns. So it doesn't raise a problem for me, but it might raise a problem for people given they might end up having commitments that are inconsistent with one another. And if they want to be in a state of reflective equilibrium, that is, if they want to have a logically consistent set of views about free will, determinism, morality, and meaning and value in life, something's got to give there. For me, I think the whole thing drops out. But other people, they might think, you can't have both, and then they got to give up something.
Okay. Well, so I've kind of scrolled through the chat, and there's just too much talk in there. Guys, if you have, but I'm not really finding good questions like regarding free will and determinism, but I can't go through the entire thing. But if you have like topics that you want to discuss about free will and determinism with Lance, in a little while, we're going to do a stream on his channel. We're going to just go over there, and then he's going to have an open stream. Anybody can join, and you can share your thoughts about free will. So please stick around for that. We're going to do one last thing right now, which is kind of discuss the research, because Lance has actually been, he's been involved with research and studying and basically different things related to this. So he has some things to share about what the actual research shows about related to this topic. So do you want to share that stuff?
Sure. Unfortunately, my answer is going to be fairly pessimistic. It seems like I'm just pessimistic about everything, although I suspect it's because I choose things that I expect to be pessimistic about, and then I'm like, exactly as expected. Like I could go into some other area of research and find all kinds of wonderful things. But I just seem to focus on this stuff. Anyway, so in the past few years, I'd say 10 or 15 years, maybe 20 years, I don't know how long it's been really. Researchers have started studying how non-philosophers think about free will. Now, one of the primary focuses of that research, and this is in an area called experimental philosophy, some of it is in kind of a social and personality psychology. A big focus there has been on this question that we talked about at the start, which is this compatibilism versus incompatibilism. And the question has been like, do people think free will is compatible with determinism? And they typically give people vignettes or these little scenarios, like little paragraph. Well, they'll say, imagine the universe is deterministic. If a person commits a terrible action in this universe, would they be morally responsible for their actions? And they try to look at what people think there. That research got really complicated really quickly because you get these really equivocal and messy responses where it's almost like 50-50 which way people tend to go. So it's just kind of unclear what people tend to think. And it gets really complicated. So for instance, in those cases, if you describe a very sort of morally neutral thing, like imagine the universe is deterministic and then this person doesn't report all their taxes properly or something in order to save money. Are they morally responsible? And then people are like, no, not really. But if you describe some horrible thing, like a person burns down their house and kills their children, then people are like, yeah, okay, they're morally responsible. And some people have proposed that there's this sort of affective bias or an emotional bias where if you're outraged, you're like, yeah, they're responsible. And then it seems like our judgments about whether people have free will or not are sensitive to biasing factors that really aren't reliable guides to whether people have free will or not. And so now we can start questioning this underlying psychological processes giving rise to our intuitions about free will. It's a whole complicated thing. But there's also been this other stream of research that is simply looking at, do people think they have free will or not? And that research, rather than giving people these sort of complicated scenarios or seeing whether they endorse compatibilism or not, instead is simply looking at to what extent do people believe in free will. And this research relies on a classical type of measures, Likert scales, where you give people a set of questions, and then you just ask them, how much do you agree or disagree with these statements? And what they'll do is they might give people 5 statements or 7 statements or 10 statements. And I'm sure most people have filled out surveys before where you have a statement, and then it's like 1 is strongly disagree, 4 neither agree nor disagree, 7 strongly agree. Could be 1 to 5 points on the scale, whatever. And in this research, and there's several different scales. There's the free will and determinism plus scale. There's the free will inventory. There's a couple, at least one new scale that came out. I know about a couple others. Some of them don't even have names, whatever. So these different sorts of scales, and some of them have been developed by psychologists, some of them by philosophers, and they ask a variety of questions about people's belief in free will. Now, what has this research shown? Well, the primary focus of this research has been to test whether or not there are correlations between the degree to which people believe in free will and various other psychological measures and behavioral measures of practical or scientific interest. And what a lot of this research seems to show is that when you ask people if they believe in free will, the lower their scores, the more sorts of bad things are associated with that. And the higher their scores, the more sorts of good things are associated with that. So, higher free will might be associated with I can't remember the list off the top of my head.
Laundry doing.
Probably laundry doing, yeah.
Yeah.
Probably laundry. That might literally be one of the things that would be on the list. Could be. It's probably not in practice, but you could measure that. So it's just all the good stuff. So greater psychological well-being, greater self-control, lower risk of having problems with addiction. So all these greater job satisfaction, greater life satisfaction. But people are better able to manage their lives, and they put more effort into their work, and there's all sorts of positive benefits associated with believing in free will, and all these negative outcomes associated with not believing in free will, with very few counterexamples. So there might be a couple cases where it flips, where less belief in free will is actually a better thing. Like you might be less punitive or something like that. Maybe that would be good. But overall, the picture seems to be belief in free will is extremely psychologically important for virtually every, not virtually every, but most measures or very many measures of that you would want to find in a population. And this might raise the sort of worry that causing disbelief in free will or doubts about free will could have serious negative psychological consequences for the population at large. Now, you and I kind of have the sense that this wouldn't follow from this, but this research seems to indicate that this is true. Now, one of my concerns with this is that these scales have been introduced into multiple languages. They started to get it's sort of exploded as a sort of area of research. Now, it hasn't exploded as much as other really big areas of research, but it's spreading to different languages, and I'm seeing these free will scales being used more and more in different sorts of journals. I have serious problems with these scales. One of them being the sort of central problem is that they ask questions that are ambiguous in such a way that it's unclear whether agreement or disagreement is actually reflective of any sort of shared, conceptually clear construct that we can meaningfully refer to as free will. Now, I'll give a sort of straightforward version of one of these questions, and then I'll talk about why that's a problem. Here would be one of the questions. I can't. In fact, I should pull up. I'm going to pull up one of these scales to actually look at the questions word for word.
Yeah, and while you're doing this, I just want to say, for those who don't know Lance, he has been working on his PhD at Cornell. So, he does have a strong background in this research. And so it's really cool to be able to get his perspective and hear the results. So, and most of your research has been on metaethics in particular, which we've talked about that topic quite a lot on this channel, and you can find our previous discussions about morality throughout the channel. But yeah, did you find it?
Yes, I did. Okay. I'm just going through the list because I have a very large appendix of all the different measures. That's one measure. That's not a good one. Let me see. I want to get one of the newer scales, or one of the ones that's used more frequently. This
and Big Thing Flying Wayne wants to know, Lance, where's your shelf of books that you've never read? You'll never read.
It's not in this room. Yeah, I do have a big shelf of books, most of which I have not read. I love that remark. Yeah, I was just talking to someone about well, whatever, it doesn't matter. People like to get books, and I get all these books, and then I just don't even read half of them. But I do find that I do a little better with audiobooks, so I'm a big fan of getting audiobooks because I can get through those. But it's gotten increasingly difficult over the years for me to get through a book. I really feel like my attention has been hampered by the way modern technology works, cell phone, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I have one of these scales. Okay, so I don't know if I should. Can I? You
can share it if you want. Yeah, just put the present and then.
I don't want to present. I just want. Is there a way for me to post it in the comments?
The link for it. Put it in the private chat, and I'll put it in the.
I don't want to link to the whole scale because it's like an appendix that I put together myself. I could just post some of the items. Here's one of them. and then maybe you could put it up on the screen. I don't know what the easiest way to do this would be.
Let's see. Okay, sure. Number
okay,
one,
so here's one of the items. People have complete control over the decisions they make. So presumably, like the way that this item would be used is if you agree with this, that means you believe in free will. And if you disagree with this, that means you don't believe in free will. Is that a good measure of belief in free will?
No, because I believe in free will, but I wouldn't be able to say I wouldn't say that this is true.
Well, why would you disagree with it?
Well, because there might be decisions that are coerced, or there might be decisions in which,
Yeah, I'm just not on my mic right now, bro.
Like they may have certain circumstances. Like if you ask me if a heroin addict has complete control over the decisions they make, I'm not going to say that that's true because, they, you know what I'm saying? Like there's chemical factors and things that might inhibit them making decisions. There might be, a mental problem that inhibits them making decisions. So I can't say it's absolutely true. Go ahead.
On a scale of 1 through 5, where 1 is you strongly disagree with this and 5 is you strongly agree with this, where would you land on that scale?
I would say 4.
Oh, so you do somewhat agree with this. So you would be picked up with as a measure of belief in free will. It would indicate, you are inclined towards free will.
Yeah.
So here's a few concerns I have, and I agree with the concerns that you raise. Mm-hmm. One of these is whether the agreement or disagreement seems to hinge on, for me, that term complete. Do you agree people have complete control over the decisions they make? Because I don't think people have complete control over the decisions they make. But I don't think that that's relevant to whether people have free will or not. I think people have control over some of the decisions they make, but they don't have complete control over the decisions they make.
Yeah, I think complete makes it a little bit, I think that makes it difficult to answer.
But you still indicated a 4, so I would pick a 1 on this or a 2.
Okay.
People would fall. So it seems to be picking up. I don't believe in free will, and you do. So far, this seems like a pretty decent measure, at least as far as our responses go. But I do have concerns of this item. One of them is it hinging on complete or not. But what you could see is that there's also potentially interpretive variation between us. Like we read this to mean somewhat different things as one another. But the other thing is that on my view of free will, I don't think control over our decisions has anything to do with, I don't think it's that relevant to whether we have free will, because I think that it's consistent with not believing in free will to think that people have control over their actions. I just think that, I just don't think that that's what free will is about. Because I don't think if you're a determinist or you deny free will that you think people don't have control. One issue with this would be, is this asking a question with a compatibilist conception of free will or a libertarian conception of free will in mind? So a compatibilist might say that control over our actions is sufficient for free will, even if it's determined. But is this asking that question, or is it asking whether our actions are not determined? I don't know. Which one do you think it is? Do you think this is asking you basically whether determinism is true or false?
All right, I'm back.
If it's false, therefore,
Wayne, can you hear me?
You have control over your actions? Or is this asking you whether people have control over their actions regardless of whether determinism is true?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I felt like she blew off your first question.
She's been blowing off a bunch of them, but she did shout out me twice.
Determinism at all.
It was more of the jokey things I said.
I would completely assume
I know she's seeing what I'm saying. That's all that matters.
Assume this
I got you.
Free will or not free will. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, and isn't that a concern?
So she's really dumb.
Are we measuring belief in libertarian conception of free will, compatibilist conception of free will? How could we be measuring one or the other in particular if the question doesn't specify one or the other in particular? That it leaves the question sort of fundamentally ambiguous.
Well, I wonder though, is it a problem?
Yeah, she real dumb.
Okay, and I agree that
she's real dumb, bro.
This is ambiguous,
at least the conversation is somewhat interesting because they're not talking about the nature of God specifically.
Overcomplicating things. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
I'm about to review that Robert Price shit for late night.
I'll do it.
There was just such a...
Did you see that? I didn't watch any of that. I don't even know if they talked about shit.
Arguments about...
Not at all.
They got into it.
And it's just exhausting.
I'm going to be over here playing BioShock, fucking up white
I don't know either, but it just seems like it's hard to know what... Here's a simple way to put it. I don't know whether agreement... I don't know what a response to this question would mean. it seems to me completely consistent with someone that denies free will to agree with this, although that doesn't strike me as very likely. But primarily, it seems to me possible for a person that believes in free will to disagree with this. A person can say, look, I think we have free will, but I don't think we have complete control over the decisions we make. Sometimes we don't have control. So that means we don't have complete control, period. So I disagree.
Right.
One. And that just seems completely compatible with not believing in free will. With believing in free will. So both agreement and disagreement with this seem consistent with believing in free will. And so I don't know what proportion of people that on reflection, if you had a long conversation and they're like, yep, it turns out I did believe in free will. What proportion of those people would have disagreed with this if they had been given it the question without really thinking or reflecting on it? I don't know. And I don't know if these researchers know. And I don't know how you would do that without some other measure of free will, which this scale itself doesn't have. But let's not dwell on this too much. Let's look at the next question. There's number 2.
Good. And we can do kind of an unofficial test on it, right?
Let's see. So everyone in the chat that wants to, you could rate whether you agree, strongly disagree, through neither agree nor disagree.
Scale to 1 to 5, right?
5, to 5 is strongly agree.
Okay, people must take full responsibility for any bad choices they make. I'd score it as a 4.
So if you disagree with this, does that mean you don't believe in free will?
No, because I think you're going to score this high and you don't necessarily believe in free will, right? Like, I don't know. What are you going to score? What are you going to say? Do you agree?
Another a 1 for me. They must. What does that mean? They must take full responsibility. What does that even mean? And also, it doesn't even say moral choices. So I make a bad choice. I have to take responsibility for it. Why? And which people? Like if children make bad choices, must they take full responsibility? What about people that lack agency for some other reason?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think people should always I don't think people must take full responsibility. That's a very strong claim. It might be that and for any bad choices they make. So literally, if you ever make any bad choice, you must take, without exception, you must take full responsibility. That part of that seems like a kind of a practical or a normative question. Maybe I think society would be a good one if people chose to, and this is something that philosophers that reject free will talk about, is take charge responsibility. So I think it might be good or character building for a person to take responsibility for the bad choices they make. But I don't think that has anything to do with free will. And is that the type of responsibility that this is asking about? Or is this asking about desert-based conceptions of responsibility? Because the central dispute in philosophy about whether we have free will is whether we have the kind of agency such that we would deserve praise or blame for our actions. Is this asking about a desert-based conception of responsibility? Or is it asking about take charge responsibility or some type of practical conception of responsibility that is consistent with denying free will?
To me, this is kind of a bit of...
I don't know. It doesn't specify.
I don't know.
Now, you might think I'm over...
It's a bit useless to me because while Lance is smart, it's like, I don't know, these type of deep philosophical conversations are not very practical to me. And he's explaining the basics to someone who just doesn't get the basics of anything.
Yeah. He's basically explaining his logic, but there's nothing here, man. They're just going to look at each other in another hour, shake hands, and part ways like nothing was imprinted or affected on each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Praise and blame for their actions, independent of practical or pragmatic considerations, whether it would be useful to punish them or not. No, whether they really deserve punishment or not. Is this the kind of responsibility that that's asking about or not? There's no way to know. And there's no way to know, independent of a bunch of extra research, how participants in a study are interpreting this. We don't know what they mean by, one issue with this is there's all these words that they're throwing in there. Responsibility, bad choices, must, take full, full responsibility. So all these terms, must, full, responsibility, bad, choices. each one of those, people could have different interpretations and different philosophical positions on the meanings and implications of each one of those terms. And this could mean that each person taking this, if they have slightly different conceptions of each of one or the other of those terms, would have slightly different interpretations of what they're being asked. And so you could get a whole pattern of responses where each person's response, each person actually has the same view, but all of their responses are reflected.
This is why Christians actually love talking to philosophy people, because philosophy is, I hate to say it, it's a word game, right? People are sitting in an armchair and trying to, discuss logic and reason and what's rational, what's possible, what's not. And so that sort of puts it on fertile ground for them to where, we're talking about, we're using words to describe it. And so I think it's much more comfortable than, say, talking to a scientist or even a lawyer or something like that. At least philosophy conversations, because I think theology is essentially like a branch of philosophy, like some weird specific type of metaphysics or something. Yeah. But
it's just God of the gaps. It's I don't know a thing, possibly God, and all philosophers do is philosophize about what's possible. So they're all about that. They don't want to talk about what is. They only want to talk about what could be, because that's all they have is a whole bunch of hope.
Right. Yeah. Forgot which button. Here we go.
Body's desires.
Yo, don't this shit look crazy?
Yeah, I didn't realize it had this type of aesthetic. I thought BioShock was like, weird.
Right?
Well, do you agree or disagree?
The thing is, the first two took place underwater because it's like a refutation of like Ayn Rand, basically.
I don't even know how to answer the question.
We're going to give you that everything you wanted to create your perfect society and all that shit. And it all fell to shit immediately, and you're making your way through that. And in this game, instead of, it's like an alternate universe. Instead of the city being underground, it's up in the sky. And it's before World War I, and there's all this like intense patriotism. Like they're talking all the same shit that Nazi Germany would be talking about. You know what I mean? Because like I've heard it 1,000 times, but white people never like to admit it. Nazis learned how to treat people from, or a major thing that showed Nazis how to treat people was Jim Crow laws. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I never thought that was before World War II.
Exactly. Hitler's quoted it. He's been quoted saying that. Like, he used the American Jim Crow laws to figure out what to do, with the undesirables.
Really?
Yeah.
That is a weird question.
That's interesting. Wow.
So,
all right, bro. I'm
weird.
feeling it.
Very weird.
Yeah.
I'll quickly show
the game's gorgeous, man.
Yeah,
okay.
It's crazy.
I guess it is my favorite question, but I'm kind of skipping over it.
Christian nationalist heaven.
Do you have more to say on this one?
I think
America,
you made
like
a really
your real
good
life.
point about what are they
simulator.
talking about with like
I'm in a floating America simulator right now.
Differentiation, because obviously, like if you have a desire for food or something like that, it's involving your body, but it's still in your mind, right? So it's just very bizarre. Like
basically, the story is I got a debt to pay. I got to go find a girl that's in that giant angel statue and try and bring her back to Earth.
That's like a psychological question.
But it's way more complex than that as well.
It just doesn't seem like a question about whether we have
I get to be a part of a rebellion against all of this whiteness. It's fucking great.
Subject to legitimate praise and blame or something. Yeah. It just doesn't seem related.
Damn.
Right.
Should I give another question?
Sure. And some people put 3s in here, and Jake for the previous question had put a 4.5.
You can't do 4.5. It's got to be one of the numbers, because imagine you're filling this out online. You've got to pick a 4 or 5. That's another problem with these kinds of studies, is that there's some degree of resolution loss in your level of agreement.
Well, clearly he thinks it's high, but he says free will doesn't exist. Okay, I don't know if he's just being silly here, but cannot choose to die. Okay.
Let me give another one of these that I think is pretty bad. So here's another item on the scale.
People can overcome any obstacles if they truly want to. Now, this one has nothing to do with free will. right? Because we don't know what they're talking about with obstacles. I mean, you might be like, there could be like physical constraints that stop you from overcoming, right? Like
Everything's cool until they ask you to stone an
seems like a
interracial
question
couple.
about like optimism or belief in
That's serious.
self-efficacy. So it seems like it's asking a question
Oh,
like,
shit.
do you
Yeah.
think?
Do you see the
people have,
imagery
like,
in the back? The
Yeah.
monkeys and shit?
power to
Are
achieve
you
their goals no matter what
are you a
problems they
white dude
face?
in this?
Yeah,
let's say
I'm
you
a
say
white
yes to
dude,
that.
and like I got nothing to do
Does
with
that,
this city.
what does that have to
I'm
do with
just
free
here to
will?
try and,
That's not what free will is about. Free
wipe
will
the debt.
isn't about succeeding no matter what
And
the obstacles
I stumble
are.
upon
Because, look,
there's
I
waters
can
of
act in my own
baptism,
free will to
there's
like
a
try to
whole
win a
crazy
battle and then
chapel
lose the battle,
Right.
and all this stuff when
Like,
you
even if
first
I
show up
chose,
to the city, so
you
you have to be
like free
baptized
will
to get
doesn't
in.
guarantee success.
Damn.
Like everything seems
That's
all
it.
nice and lovely on the
Like,
walk
that's not how
over
I
here, but
conceptualize
now
it.
the
No,
story
and I
continues.
would put
And it's single player open world?
Yeah, single player. It's
Okay.
the shit. You should really play it one time, just for the storyline. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
overcoming. But like
The
you
whole thing
said,
is about how
this isn't even about free will.
nationalism,
Right. So
Christian
it's not just
nationalism
that I
is
would
just
like
a fucking
so
problem.
I disagree
This
with
game
this,
came out
but
like
also I just don't
2015,
even see what agreement or
2014.
disagreement has to
Damn.
do
Yeah.
with
He says it's called
whether or not
Bioshock?
you have free will
Bioshock.
with this particular
Bioshock
question.
Infinite.
The question
Yes.
seems to
Infinite.
be indicating
It's the
that
third
it's
one.
like, do you believe people can literally achieve anything no matter how difficult it is, if they have sufficient desire to do
That's-
so? Like, it's almost like
Throwing it at
it's
the
just asking
announcer, of course.
straightforwardly: is desire sufficient to achieve a goal? No. Like,
All right.
what kind of question is that? Now, I would see that if someone
Call me
says you
boy.
could do anything you want to. I don't think when people say that they literally mean it. I mean, they certainly don't mean literally anything. Because, okay, well, I want to jump over the moon. I can't. Sorry. I want to teleport. I want time travel powers. I can't choose any of that. So I can't do anything I want to. Often, I think that that's a way of expressing optimism about a person's prospects. And it's intended to encourage a person and say, look, pursue your dreams, do the things you love, act in accordance with your values, be your authentic self. And those are all, nice things to encourage people to do. But to use a statement that seems like it's an expressive rather than like a literal statement about like optimism about achieving your dreams or whatever, and then treat almost like a metaphorical or non-literal remark as a measure of free will when it doesn't even seem related to free will, just strikes me as profoundly strange. And you'll find I'll post the other three items from the scale. I'll put all of them in here so people can see the rest of the scale. In fact, I'll just post the whole scale if it'll let me.
Wait, now, is this the study, though, that you were telling us about where there was a positive correlation between free will and believing in free will and, like, having, good interactions in society?
This isn't a study. This is a scale that's used by many of those studies. And there's a bunch of different studies.
Okay. So then shouldn't we throw out that result about, the correlation between belief and free will? And now that we know that this is the scale that they're using and it doesn't seem like it's a good measure, then
people in cages,
shouldn't we not trust the results of the correlation?
That's my
did?
inclination. Yeah, that's kind of the point is I'm skeptical of these findings, like the correlations, because if the measure of free will isn't actually capturing any sort of reliable systematic construct, then why should we think that we've identified a correlation between belief in free will and whatever this other construct is if it's unclear what these items are measuring? Now, when people design these sorts of scales, they use various sorts of statistical procedures to demonstrate the reliability of the scale. And so they might report a Cronbach's alpha, they might do factor analysis, and they might report other sorts of statistical measures that would indicate things like that, or purport to indicate things about the reliability of the scale and the sort of conceptual relatedness of the items. And what you might find is that, for instance, the way that people respond to any one of the questions on this scale is predictive of the way that they respond to the other questions on the scale, in a way where it would make sense to see their responses to this set of questions as conceptually related. It would appear that they're measuring the same thing if people's answers to the questions tend to be very similar. In other words, if I know your answer to question one, I'm gonna have pretty good insight into your answers to the rest of the questions, and the same would hold for the rest of them. And the researchers that devise these skills they have reported these sorts of measures, and the way that people answer question 1 does do a pretty good job of indicating how they'd answer the rest of the questions. And the same would hold for the rest of the items on the scale. In fact, they tend to drop items that don't have those characteristics. And so at the very least, people respond to this cluster of questions in a predictable way where it's not like their answers to one question are random or unrelated with respect to their answers to other questions. And that is typically taken to be an indication of the internal consistency of the scale. And that is supposed to be at least one piece of evidence that would indicate that this is measuring what it's intended to measure. The problem with that is that consistency alone is largely relying on a kind of coherentist framework for understanding your knowledge about the set of items in question. And one problem with this is simply because the answers to a set of questions are similar to one another, it does not mean that they're measuring the thing that you intend to measure. And here's a thought experiment I could give you to illustrate why that's not true. Imagine I gave you the following set of questions. And just imagine how you would answer these questions. I show you a photo of a banana, and I ask you, is this this is a banana, agree, disagree? Would you agree or disagree? Assuming it's a photo of a banana.
Agree.
Okay, I show you another photo of a banana, agree, disagree?
Agree.
I show you a drawing, like a painting of a banana, agree, disagree? Is it a banana?
Agree.
So I keep asking questions like that, and you agree with all of them. Would your answers to those questions be consistent? Yes, you're agreeing with all of them, right?
Right.
Now, what if I told you that that's a measure of whether you agree that atheism is true? And you agreed with all of them, so that means you agree atheism is true.
No.
That would be ridiculous, right?
Right.
And so how well the items predict one another doesn't tell you how well they predict the thing that you're trying to measure. And so you would need to have additional reasons beyond the consistency of the items to demonstrate that they measure what you're intending to measure. Now, one of the things you might then look at that researchers would want to look at is the predictive validity of the items. So what that means is, do people's measures on these scales predict the things that we would expect them to be associated with, to allow us to predict? To give a kind of intuitive example, if I gave a measure of like belief in Christianity, you would expect that, if not a perfect prediction, it would predict whether or not you would go to church or, I don't know, read the Bible or something like that,
right.
Such that it doesn't mean that if you say you're a Christian in my measure, that necessarily you go to church. It's just that on average, people that agree with a bunch of like imagine I use a question like this: Jesus is Lord, or Jesus died for our sins. Agree, disagree? Would you agree or disagree?
Agree.
And I would disagree with that. And that would probably be a decent predictor of whether or not we go to church. So it would have predictive validity in the sense that you could use our measures or responses to the question to predict our real world behavior in a way that's consistent with the conclusion that we're really measuring belief in Christianity. And that would be very reasonable. You might go to church or pray or do other things that would indicate you believe in Christianity, and I wouldn't. So it would be an accurate measure, probably. It'd be really weird if Jesus died for our sins had nothing to do with predicting if someone was Christian or not. It'd be ridiculous, right? So sure, that's going to work out to be a good measure. Now, in this case, we have all these measures of belief in free will. Does it predict the behavior we would expect to be associated with belief in free will? Well, that raises an interesting question. What behavior do we expect to be associated with belief in free will? That seems contestable. I don't think belief in free will is going to lead to better behavior rather than worse behavior. How would we know that it is associated with that? These measures are intended, like you can't use the initial measures that are finding these correlations. They're almost like exploratory correlations as indications of their predictive validity, when the very thing that one could contest is whether or not that's what you would expect to predict. So again, it doesn't seem like a good way of establishing the validity of these measures to show that they're really measuring free will. So ultimately, my position on this matter is that what you need is what I would call, and I don't know if there's terminology in the psychological literature that I'm not aware of. I haven't gone back and read the past 100 years of psychological literature, but I would call it interpretive validity. What you would need to show is that the participants in these studies are interpreting the questions in the way that the researchers intend for them to be interpreted. And that requires the researchers to have a clear conception of what it is, how it is they expect them to be, the questions to be interpreted. And I think that they're going to run into two problems. One is the papers that are measuring belief in free will don't seem to offer particularly clear conceptualization. You could call it an operationalization. What is it they're trying to measure? Belief in free will. Okay, well, what is free will? When I talk about this in my work, I say that free will as a term is a piece of technical jargon that was created by philosophers that reflects the term is used as a kind of placeholder for an ongoing dispute that is ironically about what free will is. It's not like in the case of in a lot of other disputes that we might have. Now, some people would dispute what God is, but for the most part, there's a lot of overlap in what people think God is. And the question largely is between atheists and theists and agnostics about, does God exist or not? Can we know God exists or not? You don't have people saying, well, I think God is a banana, and someone going, I think God is like, it's not ridiculous like that. God is this omnipotent being that created the universe and yada yada. We can all agree on the definition.
Unless you talk to Richard Madsen.
And then we just dispute, does it exist or not? Can we know if it exists or not? But that's not the case with free will. In the case of free will, it's not like everyone agrees on what free will is, and then we're arguing whether we have it or not. Actually, the central dispute is, what is free will? Is it the sort of, can we conceptualize it as a special type of agency we have free will so long as our actions are consistent with our desires or goals? Or is it a responsiveness to reasons? Is it a certain kind of control over our actions that stems from a certain type of deliberative or reasoning processes? Or is it this kind of capacity that has certain sorts of metaphysical implications for our actions being the ultimate source of like our will, or ourselves being the ultimate source of our actions? Or, is it this requirement that certain actions are made under conditions in which we could have done otherwise in certain sort of metaphysically heavy way? Everyone is disputing that. So how can you measure free will? What is it? Which conception of free will are you measuring? Which one? So what free will is a contested concept, and we have all these different conceptions that are very different from one another. They have different metaphysical implications. They have different epistemic considerations. They factor in different sorts of psychological considerations. They have all sorts of different implications and conceptualizations. And so you can't measure belief in free will. You can only measure belief in some form of free will, like this conception or that conception. For instance, are these scales measuring compatibilist conceptions of free will or incompatibilist conceptions of free will? And someone could say, oh, well, the measures are just neutral with respect to that. It's just measuring whether they believe in either one of those or neither of those. But the questions you would ask to measure in an incompatibilist conception or a libertarian conception of free will are potentially different from the questions you would ask to measure a compatibilist conception of free will. Why think you could use the same questions to measure two different conceptions of free will? Why think that? Those are different conceptions. And so none of this seems to be factored into how these questions are designed or measured or thought about at all. So that's just one problem, which is it's unclear what these items are intended to measure. You have a second problem. Whatever you're intending to measure, it still requires participants. In order for your measure to be a valid measure of whatever it is you intend, your participants, the vast majority of your participants, must consistently and reliably interpret all of your questions in such a way that their answers are genuinely reflective of their position towards the intended interpretation. They have to interpret the questions as intended. And so you both have to have a clear conception of how they're intended to be interpreted, and you would have to know that people are interpreting them in the way that you intend. And when you ask really ambiguous and odd questions like this, it's unclear what you're measuring, and it's unclear how people are interpreting the questions. And so I have very little confidence that we know what we're measuring here.
Wow. Well, yeah, I was thinking about another problem with the results that you mentioned about that they found that people who believe in free will, let's assume that the conception is like the same conception that the survey builders had in mind is the conception that the person has in mind. Let's say there's no ambiguity, just supposing for a moment that the same conception is in mind. If, we get positive results that, okay, the people who marked high on this survey for free will also tend to be better people in society, less crime, more, productive at work and all these things. And then better people in society, the conclusion less crime, is made that okay, more, because they productive they believe at work in and all these things. The conclusion is made that people who believe in free will, end up doing better in life or something like that. That is like assuming that the belief participated in that, rather than you don't know which actually came first. Like, is it just that actually people who tend to do better in life, you know, because for whatever, maybe they didn't have the same obstacles as the other people, right? Yeah, as the criminal. So maybe the people who don't commit crimes and go to work every day end up forming this belief about free will. And the people who commit crimes end up forming a belief that they don't have free will. So you don't know if the belief affected the person or if the person's circumstances affected their belief.
You're absolutely right. So what you're pointing to would be the very common problem that some people make the mistake of, which is inferring causation from a correlation. Now, correlations don't necessarily entail any particular causal relation between any set of variables. So there could be any number of causal relations. There could be a bidirectional causal relation. It could be that there's a third variable that causes two things to both correlate with one another. There's all sorts of possible causal things. Now, I should say the psychologists and the philosophers in question are not making that mistake. They are not thinking that if we find a correlation between belief in free will and positive outcomes, that therefore we may automatically infer that the belief in free will is causing the positive outcomes. They're not making that mistake. They are noting the correlation, though, and that does raise the possibility that increased belief in free will is causally responsible for at least some of these positive outcomes. Now, there's another line of research that I did not bring up that does attempt to experimentally manipulate degree of belief in free will and then test people's behavior or test the consequences of changes to belief in free will. And what that research purports to show is that if you can induce reduced belief in free will, that this causes negative behavioral consequences, that it causes worse behavior. Now, some concerns with that research is that some of the central studies that have been conducted didn't replicate, meaning that subsequent attempts to test participants using similar stimuli did not yield the same results. And so that may be an indication that some of those findings are like they're not real. They're like that the effect is not really there. That reducing belief in free will causes these sorts of problems. But this is yet again a case where I have a problem with the measures that were used, which is that I don't believe that these studies successfully manipulated disbelief in free will in the first place. And I actually have those measures. I actually have those manipulations here. So basically, let me go up to those.
You want to pull them up? Okay.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I could post. Let me see if I could. I might have a link I could give people. Nah, it's like linking to a PDF. That's weird. I don't want to give people that. I'll see if I could find this somewhere. Yeah, it's.
Well, why don't we do that? Why don't we go over? Do you want to go over to your channel?
Sure, I could pop over to my channel. I'd like to take a break real quick. So I'd like to get a drink and refresh and like let my mind reset. But let me see if I could find a link to this thing so people can read this real quick. So let me set this up in advance. So just to explain what I did, so then I could give people something to do while I go take a little quick break and we move over to my channel. Are you coming over to my channel too?
I will come over to your channel.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, but I will also take a little break. But but I'll be over there shortly. But I just want it for those who didn't hear the announcement and weren't here at the beginning. Lance started his own channel. This is going to be the first video on his channel. The stream link that I put that I pinned at the top of this, and I'll put it again in the chat now. But this is if you want to come over to Lance's new channel and join the stream. And this is the stream link, and the link to Lance's channel, I'm going to put that up now also, if you just want to come and be in the chat. And Lance will appreciate your support if you subscribe to his new channel. So this is going to be the first thing on his channel. We're going to go over there and continue the discussion, but let people come in and talk with us. So please come over to those links. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you guys over there. And if anybody doesn't see it in the chat after this ends, the link is down in the description of the video, so you can check that for the same link, okay? So thank you so much, Lance. This has been awesome. And so you want to say 10 minutes from now?
Yeah, I'll get that going. But just as a warning, I haven't done this before, so there's probably going to be some technical issues. But are you going to be able to walk me through those?
Yeah, just let.
I told Aaron, I'm going to Dinosaur Adventure Land. Please come. Let's go and meet these guys and see what's up. And obviously wasn't too receptive. I'm sorry. All right, if you would.
Why do you think that would be? Why would Aaron Ra not be too receptive to come to Dinosaur Adventure? Is it too expensive? Is it too expensive? I hear he makes a lot of money off YouTube, but I don't know. If I was in his position, I would go. You don't have to donate or anything like that. You just go and visit and leave. But I don't know, Aaron, Mr. Nelson, give us some answers, brother.
Would like Aaron to come here. Say, come, Aaron. Come on, Aaron. Come on. Come on, Aaron.
I got a lot of work to do.
Then yeah, you do, and you're gonna have a lot of fun doing it.
Could I ask about that? What I was asking earlier. See what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah.
As far as how well the Bible does
So we
fit
got Hunter
together.
Biden's laptop in here, and
Let's just say
I
we
do
just
appreciate
look
you
at the
stopping
New
by, man.
Testament. Of course, you could.
And
It's
yeah,
a
if
whole
you could give me
completion
some
as the
feedback on
Protestant
my
Bible is
audio
presented.
settings.
But
I'm struggling with it.
how do you think it ended up
Oh,
lining up as
finally
well
gave
as it
up.
does, even though there's questions of certain things, and of course, textual variants. And if there were screwball ideas in between, like why? Like I don't hear anybody ever talking about these texts where, say, a story evolved into this and this into this. You know what I mean?
Well, the order of the Old Testament has been changed. So to say that it lines up, there's a if you think Matthew was the first book, then it lines up with the current Old Testament for the Christian. If you think that Mark is the first, it actually lines up with the Jewish Bible.
Well, most
So-
people tend to think Mark was.
Mark
At
and
least
priority.
Mark's-
Yeah.
I am of
Mark
the
is probably
belief
first.
that originally this was supposed to be a Jewish belief system, just another sect of Judaism. And that there was potentially some form of Matthew, but some sort of Aramaic document that was specifically for the Jews, and then Paul kind of changed that. And then by the time we got our Gospels, that what we know as Gospels in the New Testament, they are,
Hey Jay, do you see
Mark
the
is the
statue right
first
here?
one written in what we have now
It's
as
the
the
leader
New
of the
Testament. But I
people,
think there was a
And he's
precursor
fighting a
to
three-headed
Matthew,
serpent.
or it might even
And
be
he-
the
in each
the
face,
Q
do you see the
document. I
faces,
don't
bro?
care. Doesn't matter.
The Jew,
But a precursor that was
Chinaman,
specifically for Jews,
and the Negro.
not for Gentiles. Whatever it was for Jews.
This shit crazy, bro.
And this Jesus
it's-
was
it's about
supposed to
get
be a presentation of a modern day Elijah, a modern day Moses, and Mark is doing that. You can tell his writings, Mark's writings, line up with the Jewish, what we call the Old Testament, with the
Right.
with the books of the Old Testament for the Jew, for the Jewish faith. And Matthew lines up with the new arrangement, and that's kind of one of the other reasons. So why, when you say that it lines up so well, it's been manufactured that way, I guess, is the easiest way to say it. And you can tell it was manufactured that way.
But yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is that like stories like where people will find a fault with, say Judas fell headlong. You know, you probably know that. you know,
I ran into
$1,000
it.
or so, but, you know, and yet, you know, we find an answer for it. Or
Right.
in a lot of apologetics, I mean, you'll find answers, and maybe they don't satisfy everyone, of course, but I do find it interesting that at least it seems to fit together pretty well for something that a number of writers wrote.
Bruce, are you aware?
Yeah, I
that
ran into
there's
this recently, Bruce,
a-
like on the
a
Muslim
third
streams.
version? Did you know there's a third version of Judas?
No, not familiar with it.
I'll come back to that. Oh no, my phone's upstairs. I'll come back
I'm
to that.
trying to
But
think. I'm looking at your name, but I don't see it. But do I know you here on YouTube, or out of curiosity?
I'm Tux TV.
Oh, okay.
I'm Tux, Jimmy Tux. So there's a third version in which Papias, Eusebius, quotes Papias about a third version of Judas, and it's quite interesting. Are you familiar with this, Nitty? Oh, he disappeared on me.
And that's
Never mind.
what Tux. I'm just looking on YouTube. TUCS.
Judas.
No, your channel name you were saying was TUCS.
Tux TV at Jimmy Tux TV.
So what is this third version of Judas?
I'm here.
Is
I'm here.
Is it a different version of what? Of how he died? In this third version?
Yes.
So
the third version of how he died, yes.
Okay.
Let me do control find. Let me see if I can find it here. Judas.
Well, that's the thing is, I remember
Death
running
of
into
Judas.
that.
Here we go. I will read this from Wikipedia. Death of Judas. This is according to Papias. Papias is kind of regarded as a... Never mind. If you don't know who Papias is, you'll have to research him on your own. But basically the path that Christian apologists take to affirm that the Gospels were early is to use Papias. And Papias is somebody who is trusted. However, he does make some mistakes, and he's kind of unreliable, in my opinion, very unreliable. And one of the reasons is unreliable is because he quotes sources we don't know they are. And there's a third account of Judas. So I'm going to read this for you. I'm going to move my things a little bit because I've got bifocals and it's easier to do it this way. According to, I don't know how to pronounce this word. Scalamogrammatical. Okay, it's a Papias related a tale
For
on
God
the
and
grotesque
country.
fate of Judas Iscariot. And this is quoted, I believe.
Oh yeah, you saw that shit? Yeah, isn't that a great mural?
Yeah.
Attributed to...
Yo, we gotta head over
can't
to
pronounce this either.
the ranch to go to the Saturday Night Live stage.
Is it?
Okay.
Plenarius
So
the
you
Younger?
can pop over there. I'll be right there.
So Judas did not die by hanging. He lived on, having been cut down from the tree before he choked to death. Indeed, the Acts of the Apostles makes this clear. Falling headlong, he burst open in the middle of his intestines and spilled out. Papias, the disciple of John, recounts this more clearly in the fourth book of the exposition of the sayings of the Lord, as follows. Judas was a terrible, walking example of ungodliness in this world. His flesh so bloated that he was not able to pass through a place where a wagon passes easily, not even his bloated head by itself, for the eyelids, they say, were so swollen that he could not see the light at all, and his eyes could not be seen, even by a doctor using an optical instrument. So far had they sunk below the outer surface, his genitals appeared more loathsome and larger than anyone else's. And when he relieved himself, there was passed through its pus and worms from every part of his body, much of his shame. After much agony and punishment, they say, he finally died in his own place. And because of the stench of the area is deserted and uninhabitable even now. In fact, to this day, no one can pass by that place without holding one's nose. So great was the discharge from his body, and so far did it spread over the ground. So there you go. Version number 3.
Well, what's that one apparently written?
Somewhere between 110 and 130. I'm sorry, 110 and 140.
And when was the incident? I should know this, but
when was the incident? Which incident are you referring to?
you're talking about after his hanging, or who is this that smells so bad?
That's Judas.
Judas is
Okay.
they're
Judas.
claiming.
So when would it? What time period would it have been exactly? I wonder.
Right after the
That's the
crucifixion.
thing. This is the problem with Papias. Is
It seems made
Papias is quoting something, and this
Okay.
is his reliability issues on full display.
But Bruce,
How
can
It's
I
not
ask you your
hard to believe
interpretation?
it's all that long, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce, can I ask you your interpretation of the apparent contradiction with Judas? I had my father-in-law when I brought it up to him because I didn't know how to answer it with the Muslims I talked to, and I think that the Jews couldn't touch a dead body. And he said something like maybe when they cut him down, that's when his guts poured out. But have you looked into it? So I don't have to.
think the apologists. I think
thought
the
the branch
apologists.
broke.
Go ahead, Bruce. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Oh, I thought you were asking me. Maybe wrong.
I was, yeah. I wanted to.
Oh, okay.
I want to know what you thought, Bruce. Yeah.
I just heard that, and the way I understood it was that the branch probably broke at the
Okay.
time. You know, I don't know. It's my understanding.
Yeah, there's a good. There's a debate, I believe, between Lacona and Ehrman, in which the two of them kind of discuss that that's a contradiction, no matter how you slice it, unless you ad hoc a solution.
Well, but why would it be impossible that he was hung, the branch broke?
The
and he
point.
fell?
The point is as the story sits all by itself, you have to add something for it to make sense.
Well,
yeah,
no, you
that's
don't.
true, but it doesn't mean that it's not possible.
I wouldn't call it having to add
It's-
something.
No matter how you slice it, as it sits, in the two accounts, they clearly contradict each other unless you come up with a plausible explanation, and you have to add to that plausible explanation.
But for instance, I saw a guy. It's for real, like outside. He actually flew out of his shoes. For real, his shoes were sitting there. How does that happen?
Mythbusters explained it pretty well.
Well, anyhow, if you want to know, I'll just say he got hit by a car.
I mean,
You know, I mean, stuff like that happens. I don't know. Just a thought.
But getting hit by a car is a thing that's real in our world.
Well, I guess
Getting hung on a tree is real in our world too, and a branch rotting, it's kind of weakened with a lot of weight on it. It could break in a day or so, or whatever. I don't know. It's just a thought. I don't know that it's.
I think it goes back to his original point, though, that if that's one of the best that they can come up with. I mean, the book's pretty well knit together. That when we are pointed out, at least, and we actually look into it ourselves, it turns out not to really be a contradiction.
Yeah, contradiction is only talking to things which are logically possible, so I don't think that's a very high standard if you're talking about trying to make a story.
Well, but if you look at the Revelation, though, with Judas and the potter's field and the 12 pieces of silver or whatever it was, there's significance in that to a Christian man.
Yeah, I mean, you could say the same thing about the Odyssey or the Iliad. You know, yeah, I don't see why you think that this makes the content of the book more plausible than a lot of stories.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that I think one of the biggest arguments against Papias being of any kind of reliability, I've heard one of the best points, in my opinion anyway, is that if he was the companion of Peter and he followed Peter around, you can read, I think Alexander Scorby's account of Mark is like 2 hours and 20 minutes, roughly. So Alexander Scorby can read the King James Version and the Merrily Merrilies in 2 hours and 20 minutes. And you mean to tell me that he memorized Peter's account of Jesus, translated it from Aramaic to Greek, and that account of Jesus' ministry can be summed up in 2 hours and 20 minutes? I call crap. I call bull crap. I call B.S. Lewis. B.S. Lewis calls Tux TV.
Oh, Scorby was good. Come on.
Scorby is excellent. I love listening to Alexander Scorby.
Yeah.
But I don't believe for a second that Jesus, if you want to say that it's, you know, it's a great story. That's what it is. It's a great fiction. It's almost a playwright if you're going to shorten it up to a perfect amount of time for somebody to sit in some form of a play, you know, with the rising tears above you and a performer performing his craft.
I guess what I'm wondering though is, do you think the Bible was put together pretty well? I mean, in the sense of a story that it flows and generally you can put together. I mean, that is put together, or is it just haphazardly kind of? And how do you do that?
Let me ask you. When was the last time you saw any kind of performance, or a comedian, for instance? I mean specifically a comedian, because Paula Gia just kind of did a video on this in the last month.
It's been a while. I don't watch a lot of comedy. I don't like comedy.
I'm
sorry, that's a bad joke.
How about any
kind
of situation comedy? I mean, or not even comedy. It could be anything. What kind of templated weekly show have you watched potentially?
Man,
Netflix. Do you watch anything on Netflix?
Very little. I mean, honestly, I'm unfortunate. I spent too much time on YouTube, and most of my life, I really did.
Who do you watch on YouTube?
I ended up working on guitars and stuff. I watch on YouTube.
Okay, Game of Thrones. Okay, just make a comparison.
So every week you tune in.
Happy Days and stuff. I think when I was little, you know.
Happy Days. So
don't do The Chosen.
So let's say when Happy Days was being constructed, you saw the writers. Let's say you could be a fly on the wall. You got to see the writers writing a pilot. You got an actor sitting around a table a week later, kind of reciting their lines to each other, and then lights, camera, action, and you have roughly 2 months later a presented product with commercials, making somebody money. Is it inconceivable that the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of John is some variation of the same thing about the 3-year ministry of a apocalyptic preacher?
The only thing that I would find hard to believe in that is that if they saw it, say, as myth, that they would present it so seriously. I kind of have to, for instance, put together Happy Days or something, or a myth, or a show that was a myth, you know, like Star Trek, whatever. I can understand that.
Well, think of the show 24. I mean, that's pretty serious.
Your arguments, Tux.
But if they actually believe it is what's difficult. If they actually believe it, or they're presenting the truth of this guy Jesus, I guess it's hard for me to think somebody's conscience wouldn't kill them.
It was entertainment. It was hired entertainment at some point.
When you say they, though, if you took Shakespeare's name off or any of his plays, right, and you didn't have the chapter names, right? All you had was the names of the dialogue of the characters. Okay, who's to say that that isn't true? There's nothing. Right? You'd think that that's actually history, and we don't have the authored names of the Gospels. All we've got is the dialogue. You've
But
actually
it's
only got the story
indications.
written.
But aren't the names based upon some indication as to why they think it is this such and such a person?
Oh, so's Henry V. You know what I mean?
I mean, like when they the book of John, 1st and 3rd John, that kind of thing. I mean, don't you think they have half an idea as to why they think?
Well, somebody must have written it, so of course they're going to assign a name to it. And it's the same thing as saying Macbeth wrote Macbeth, you know.
Yeah. I suppose the
In fact,
things that are
it's even
said in the
worse.
Bible.
Because they don't say it within the text. They don't say, I, Matthew, wrote this.
I know what
I
I'm trying
attest
to
to
do.
this as being an eyewitness because I knew so-and-so who saw it. And this is the story from him, you know.
Do you think like Greek mythology, like I think it's, to me, it comes across differently than the authority that
How
comes
so?
across in the Bible. Maybe I'm wrong.
How so, Bruce? Why do you think it's different? What about it makes it different? I mean, we don't know that Homer wrote the Iliad or the Odyssey. That's just
Somehow
an assigned name.
across as being more mythical, where the Bible, I think, comes across as they really believed what they're saying. Maybe,
Right,
like I said, I could be wrong on that. I could be wrong.
Well,
I haven't studied enough myth.
Sure,
But talking snakes.
The
and
Iliad
people
comes
coming
across
back-
exactly that way as history, right? I mean, it's written as a history.
Yeah, that's true.
And there are supernatural claims within it, admittedly. So yes, we call it myth because of that reason.
Right.
I can't see the difference when you're talking about claims within the Bible.
But the different apostles had. I mean, you can somewhat decipher who wrote them by the way that they write them. And
I
the type
don't
of
think
people
they
they were.
originally even claimed that they were the ones that were writing them. They just needed.
They never
something.
claimed it. No, they didn't need to because it's demonstrated.
I'm saying, no. Even the people at the time didn't say, "Well, Mark." They
Correct.
just assigned a name to it because they had to differentiate them. Oh yeah, the Gospel of Jesus.
There's evidence for it.
There's like 6. Oh well, the one that kind of goes along with Mark. How about that? Okay.
Well, Mark was like, I don't know, writes in the way where he represents Jesus being a servant. He would emphasize what Jesus did. It was written in a way like to the Romans. It's just like you can see it. I don't know how to explain it fully, but each one plays a different role. I think Tux touched upon it earlier, where it seems so well put together that it seems like it's just been scripted for a play.
If you had heard all your life that Thomas wrote it, would you still feel the same way that it would have to have been Mark, that it couldn't have been Thomas, even though it was named the Gospel of Thomas?
That's a tough question to honestly answer because it didn't happen.
Right.
Like I don't know, but I mean, if you flip the names around, it would be way more confusing because they're different people with different occupations, with different backgrounds, and it wouldn't make as much sense as it does.
I'm gonna, if I may, I'm going to play a clip from Apologia, kind of touching on this very subject, if that's all right. I'll put this over here like so, and do this like this. Hopefully everybody can hear this. This is from Apologia's Christian Cop Shoots Bible in the Foot. Alright. Hopefully everybody can hear it okay.
beholden to inerrancy statement of faith commitments, are free to acknowledge that the Gospels are clearly drawing from multiple sources. To insist that the authors were personally eyewitnesses is wishful thinking rather than inference from evidence. Just as Jim told us, you would be hard-pressed to know whether it was he or Frank on some of these issues.
Yeah, so we all do that, right? So now that becomes this oral tradition that's out there. And if one of us writes a book or two of us write a book, we're going to include the same kind of verbiage, the same kind of verbiage with how we express it. But it's because we have a common oral tradition.
You attribute the verbiage similarities between
and he's
you
going
and
to play us
Frank to common oral tradition because you know that you two have toured together. But I'll point to Christians who use your phrasing or Frank's phrasing when posting messages in my comment section, something that happens all the time. I have no way of knowing whether they read your books, heard your lectures, or both. That evidence is inconclusive, just as the evidence of a Q source gives no definitive reason to confidently affirm a written document or an oral tradition. It's completely ridiculous for Jim to be sticking his neck out here, but since he's the one who put it in the guillotine voluntarily.
And what I have discovered also is that we end up speaking these things over and over and over again. So that if you were to transcribe, and I used to tease Frank about this because I've heard his I don't have enough faith to be an atheist talk. We did these fearless faith conferences. Oh my gosh. We did these, and I heard that talk so many times. I could give it the same exact. I could pause for the same jokes. If you were to line up the audio files, you would see they peak at the exact same times because we're delivering it the exact same way.
Frank's I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist book, the original foundation of his speaking tour lecture, came out in 2004. So Frank Turek has been honing this material for at least 18 years. Jim even mentions that he pauses at certain spots, anticipating where jokes will land with the audience.
By the way, all the proceeds from the sale of the books, the curriculum, the DVD, will go to feed needy children. Mine. And by the way, all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. All the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. I just want to point out all the proceeds from the sale of the books will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay?
In his hundreds, if not 1,000, performances, Frank knows what gets a response and what doesn't. I think the comparison to a comedy set is an apt one. If you ever listen to behind-the-scenes interviews with stand-up comedians, like the 2002 The Comedian documentary featuring Jerry Seinfeld and currently available on Netflix, they all talk about practicing their material over and over in club after club, night after night, trying different phrasings, different timings, different cadences. They keep what works and change what doesn't until they finally have the tight set that gives them the best chance at big laughs.
Well, when I did an HBO special last year, I retired everything I've ever written and wanted to start fresh. Doing all this stuff I had never said before to anyone. It's just thoughts. So this is how comedians develop material. Right. And as you can see, it's quite painful. When you're crafting an act, you need to see how that material works in front of each different type of situation. Can you believe you're in charge of deciding whether our brilliant ideas are good or not? You get to decide what's good and what's not good, and we believe you. And what the hell do you know about it? Nothing.
So, there's my offer to you. This is practice. It's rehearsed. It came from an entire genre of apocalypse preachers, which is kind of a mesh of Hellenistic influence on Jews, Maccabean influence on Jews, and just plain everyday life when the Romans are marching into town.
I can see that. There's something I wonder that's like, for the amount of time they would have put together, and don't you think there would have been left some manuscripts that would be, you'd have more than, say, Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, and, say, the Byzantine text. Like, you'd have more radical things different than just things here and there.
Yeah, I would love to say that there was a first century mark, and even if there was, it wouldn't probably change much. But roughly, roughly, to me, most of this stuff didn't matter until it was the official Roman religion. Most of that stuff didn't matter. Being entertaining in the first century, second century, whenever that script was made, being entertaining was all that mattered.
So you're thinking
When
like
that got
most
old and stale and they had to replace it, we may have gotten an old and stale version, and it's just slightly different than the previous, fresh and new that becomes old and stale, etc., etc. So you can just kind of see an evolution, in my opinion. The codexes that you've mentioned, they are completely different from the 7th century. The 3rd and 4th century partials and completes that we have are different from the 7th and 8th century.
Okay, so
and the 7th and 8th
partial-
century are different, slightly different anyway, from the 11th and 12th century, which is what the King James Version was based on.
Okay, you're talking about the majority or Byzantine text family for the most part, or what they got from the Latin Vulgate, right? Is that predominantly what they would have used?
For the King James?
Yeah.
The majority of, well, maybe not the majority, but a very large portion of the work was done in German prior to the King James. It's my understanding that the King James was based off of partial work that was done for the German version.
The Geneva Bible or what?
I don't remember the names of them.
Didn't they
But that
mostly use
person
the
was
Vulgate?
seen as a heretic.
Well, they would have looked at the Vulgate.
For
They
it
looked at
not
a number
being
of
in
Greek
the original.
manuscripts. Wait. I'm pretty sure they had a number of Greek manuscripts, which
like 5,000, I think.
I don't know that they had that.
5,000 does not show up until closer to the 15th century.
No, I'm saying they had a number of manuscripts. I think that we feel today would have been what we probably call the majority text family or the Byzantine text family, and then they had the Latin, and of course they could look at the Geneva and the bishops or whatever else preceded it, right? I think that's my understanding, but
yeah,
aside
Geneva,
from that-
Erasmus,
but
and
bag that though. That's not where I'm going. I'm looking as we go further back in manuscripts. That for the most part agree pretty well. We have some variants, but my question is, where were these? Why don't we seem to have anything of these stories developing? Even though it makes sense that could have happened, I don't know of anything like that. I mean, we have Gnostic Gospels and different things like that, but nothing is the stories building that becomes something different that I know of.
Well, most of the Gnostic Gospels are actually late 2nd century. Most of them. Gospel of Thomas, I don't believe is dated until late 2nd century, early 3rd century.
So what do we have? I should know this stuff, but I mean, going back in time, what are the earliest manuscripts we have? Are they like what they found in the Dead Sea Scrolls or
the epistles?
Whatever.
Paul's epistles are the majority of the first writings we have.
Right, and then when we get into, I think Mark is probably the next, isn't it?
A portion of Mark is from, when is P52 dated to? I don't even remember.
And so I guess what I mean is, say you're looking at Mark, at that time period, and then we go on to other manuscripts that are, maybe there's more manuscripts, but
the first
not as old. But the point is, do they really disagree much? I mean, they don't seem to, from what I've seen.
According to this, about 125 AD plus minus 25 years. So somewhere between 100 and 150 is the dating to P52. I don't know the answer to that. I feel like there were apocalyptic preachers like Peter that Mark is getting his information from. He didn't sound that much different, in my opinion, to John the Baptist. He didn't sound much different to Jesus or whatever Jesus' non-character name was, whatever his human name was, instead of his alter ego character name. In my opinion, James the Just, that is supposedly Jesus' brother. If you read, you can read his writings in roughly 15 minutes. Right? If you look at his writings, he sounds like an apocalyptic preacher from the 1st century, says exactly what he wants to say. He doesn't talk about his brother, how great it was to have a half God, or fully God, fully human brother. He doesn't talk about how great it was to get to experience a couple of more days with his brother after he thought he'd lost him. He doesn't talk about any of that stuff. It's nose to the grindstone, trope, trope, trope. You know, just like practice, just like Seinfeld in the clip we just played. You have politically hit individuals for whatever reason, whether they're, getting a following, getting popular, leading people into insurrections and seditious activities, tossing tables at temples, whatever the reason they are getting hit, it's usually political. They've usually pissed somebody off, and they think in my opinion, these political leaders think that this guy is full of crap, he's lying through his teeth, and we have zero tolerance for that. So whatever's going on, you see in that evolution, you see popular apocalyptic preachers just saying their trope. They've practiced it. They've learned from essentially the same basics. John the Baptist, in my opinion, probably doesn't sound that much different than James the Just. What changes is the temple's gone. Let's bring hope to the people. And they bring out essentially the modern contemporary version of Homer's works with a savior figure, and let's entertain the masses and bring them out of their humdrum lives just for a moment, if we can. Like, for instance, and then I'm going to shut up, how many people, in 1975, how many people in this world considered themselves of the religion Jedi? And fast forward, almost 50 years later, we're like 47 years later, I think. How many people in this world consider themselves of the religion Jedi? I mean, I can assure you it's not that much, but it's a hell of a lot more than it was 50 years ago. There were 0 50 years ago. And 45 years later,
from now, we're going to have Jedi.
How many
Messiah.
years from now? Just an entertaining story that brought people out of a gas crunch, that brought people out of shortages, that brought people out of...
Tux, you fascinate me because you're obviously a smart guy. You've also told me that you think, even though you're an atheist, you think that the devil wrote the Bible, or why not? You believe that you agree that the Bible is pretty significant in its structure, but you think it was just put together like Seinfeld puts together a comedian. Like, I just can't quite get to the real crux, Tux, of why you have such a problem with this stuff.
You say the what wrote the Bible?
I think that Jesus is a deceiver. I think Jesus is deception.
Thinks he's the snake in the garden.
I don't think that. I don't.
Check. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
beings need to exist for us to have the Holy Bible. I think human beings are fully capable of creating a deception scenario sugar-coated in the way that we see it now and today. You don't need a God. You don't need a Jesus. You don't need a Holy Spirit. You don't need a devil. Human beings are fully capable of doing this book all by themselves with their creative capacities.
But I think you
and
fail
that's what
to
makes
see
it deception.
how this, and that's why I take a stand so much with Nitty on relying on people who claim to be scientists and when things were written and that authenticity, because if you don't have that to stand on, it's clear that the Bible stands outside the time domain. You know, a large portion of it, all of it, is written by God, Tux.
It's not written by God. Let me give you a scenario in which I think it would be written by God, and this is completely ad hoc. Let me respond to Richard Matson. So let me give you a scenario. What happens with Elisha and the 20 loaves and feeding of the 120? And what happens in the story of Jesus and the loaves and fishes and the feeding of the 5,000? What happens? How does that happen?
Well, you have to rely on it being a miraculous thing that Jesus did.
Perfect. Right. What about the Bible is miraculous? Where do I see, for instance, Jesus came out of the tomb, the angels that were presiding beside him is already has God's word. He's given it to Jesus. Jesus has fulfilled the new covenant, and he is going to pass out his new word. And it's amazing. That Bible, it is protected by miracle. It is indestructible. And guess what? Every once in a while, it replicates itself, except it comes out with whatever language is needed to be to clarify anything that comes up in human association with serving God. Do we see a copying and a pasting of the loaves and fishes to feed 5,000, to educate 5,000 from the miracle of Jesus? Is it so incomprehensible that the miracle of Jesus couldn't be going on today with the replication of his word?
Even if I prove to you the Bible was divine, Tux, you'll just say that no, it's just man that made it, and they just kept on making it better and better throughout time, and they saw what works. You made that clear today.
Yeah, well,
you'll find a way,
but
that's why,
But what's the opposite?
You'll be missing out.
Would you be able to present the opposite of this is how we know it's a miracle?
With the fishes?
With the Bible.
Prove the fishes.
With the Bible. What part of the Bible is miraculous?
I lean on things like the genealogy from Adam to Noah and the other genealogies and what the words mean, what the letters behind the words mean. It all kind of puts together a picture, with little brush strokes. You have to step back and see it. You can argue each brush strokes not divine, but once you step back and see the big picture, it works. I mentioned things like just how, as far as I can tell, the literal interpretation of the camp in the wilderness is in the shape of a cross, thousands of years before the crucifixion. But this is my personal stuff that I lean on as evidence. I think the Bible has the ability to pierce the heart of everybody in different ways. I don't know, and that's why I'm curious. I don't know what that's going to be with you, Tuck. I don't know.
Well, I think I've had the equivalency of Paul's vision, And that touch was that there's no need for faith if you have Satan's alibi. There's no need for faith if you have Satan's alibi.
It always comes down to this, doesn't it?
So all I have to do is pick up the Bible, and any verse that you read, any example that you read, all I have to do is ask, where's Satan's alibi? If you're going to propose to me that it came from Jesus and it only could have come from Jesus, and I say, well, there's a chance that it came from the devil, would you be able to provide me with any kind of information that shows, you know what, the devil couldn't have done this? We know so, because Jesus locked the guy up, threw away the key. But we don't have that. We have
God
people
says
coming
he can't
on.
lie. Doesn't the Bible, according to Yahweh, Jehovah, say that he can't lie?
And the Bible and the snake never did lie.
Oh, here we go again.
Oh
my God.
I'm telling you, this is a good road to go down. I will talk about this till the cows come home. But
If I may just state, if I may ask something which is related to what, if I may ask something which is what was related to what Tuck said earlier. The story that Tuck's eloquently described of this being a group of people making a story in order to entertain and to hone it and to be a better entertainers, the stories were honed over time and indeed adopted and changed over time in order to be to appeal to more and more people. You would believe that story when we talk about it being the Iliad. There's no contradiction there with the verbal passing down of a story over many generations.
Talking about Plato's book?
In which case, which is much more complex than the Bible. It takes a lot longer to read than the Bible. Okay? Being passed down word of mouth to entertain and to be refined over generations, and people openly changing it, in the case of the Iliad, and then finally written down in whatever 400 AD or 400